Hey guys, STLYoungblood with you today, and I've wanted to hit on this subject for a while, mainly because I think it's an interesting topic. And what topic am I referring to? Well, lock-on missiles, of course. Now, there's so much hate regarding these weapons in-game that it actually makes people send hate tells to other players when they're killed by someone using these weapons. Hate tells. I think that's a hilarious concept anyways. I don't understand how someone's going to get so worked up in a video game that they feel the need to write through the system to the other player and tell them just how terrible they are for using something that's in the game. The concept in general just makes me laugh. Anyway, let's get to the point here, and why I think this is a phenomenon and why it's become such a dividing point in the community is probably because we praise skill. We all desire to have skill, and people want to be the best. And I think that's probably where all this starts. Now, in the air landscape, those that come in with a nose gun and afterburner tanks on their vehicles, those are generally the players that are considered to be the ones that are using the most skill, primarily because they've left behind an option for another weapon and are rolling out to the battlefield with one less weapon option than they could have had. So in the eyes of many in the community, I think they think that they've sacrificed firepower and left themselves at a disadvantage. And when they win a battle, it looks like they've overcome these great odds. So while you may not necessarily agree with that sentiment, maybe you should ask yourself, why else would that be considered the elite loadout? So when we talk about running only a nose gun and an afterburner, what's the key there? Well, I think in general, player skill is the key, and specifically about accuracy and maneuverability. In order to really compete with this loadout, you need to have good accuracy. It needs to be pretty solid. And now that's less important if you're flying in a group. I think that's worth pointing out because there's a lot more people landing shots, and it's a contributing factor. So it's worth at least keeping in mind. But now we're saying that this is the elite setup, and it's because it's being run by pilots with the most skill. It's important to keep in mind, though, that the time to kill with the nose gun, and only using the nose gun, is probably one of the fastest in the game. Now, if we pair that fast time to kill with the flying ability of the elite pilots, all of a sudden you have yourself a super deadly setup. But just because that works for the elite, would someone else with less skill have the same effectiveness? I kind of doubt it. So this is where we get to some of the different setups and options that other players use. So let's go ahead and start out with the conventional air-to-air missiles like the Tomcats. And boy, the community does not like Tomcats. Well, what you gain for yourself by using Tomcats is a secondary weapon option. So essentially you're bringing more firepower. Now what you lose out on is extra speed maneuverability by not carrying the external afterburner tanks. The Tomcats are a lower skilled weapon, I will admit that, because you generally just have to get behind somebody, lock on, release, and then switch to your nose gun, and boom, lots of damage real quick. There are some problems that we're all aware of when using Tomcats though, specifically two. One is there's a hard counter to them, flares. If you come up against a smart player who's running flares, they can go ahead and pop their flares, stop the missile from making contact, and prevent you from locking on again for a while. And in that time, the smart player is going to close the gap between the two of you. And then if they have a nose gun and afterburners, you're up close with a target who's more maneuverable. And your option, the Tomcats, are going to have limited effectiveness because it's hard to lock on when you're spinning around each other. So most of the time in this situation, the non-missile player is going to win the engagement. Now, there's really no pro and con, there really is a lot of pros and cons when using the Tomcats. And I personally lean on the side of using Tomcats as more of a con than a pro. So where the issue starts to get a little bit more hairy is with the Coyotes. And now, if the community doesn't like Tomcats, boy, I mean, they've got a true hatred for Coyotes. And in a way, I can kind of understand that. Coyotes give you, some of the same easy mode factor that the Tomcats provide, but come with a couple other benefits. The most noticeable is the fact that you don't have to acquire a lock because they do that in air. So basically giving the opponent very little opportunity to do something different. You can pop flares, but it's really tough because there's not much notice. Especially if you're running like an ambush setup and they can get really well behind you and they kind of sneak up on you, then you can be pretty well screwed. Another benefit is that they're more forgiving in those close quarters circling dogfights we talked about. So while you have to hold your reticle over that quickly revolving target if you're using Tomcats when it's up close, Coyotes have the distinct ability to be spammed, and that results in damage that you wouldn't have received using the Tomcats. So trust me, I get it. I agree that the Coyotes still need to be reworked. Anyway, I think where the community really gets pissed off is when a truly skilled pilot decides to run with lock-ons of any kind. These are the elites. These are the ones that, regardless of their loadout, are going to win the majority of their engagements. And while the issue is that you're giving a top-tier pilot an easier setup, we're supposedly giving them more effective means to kill everyone else. I think to a point that's a fair gripe, but I think my main takeaway from this, and it always has been, their overall skill is what's leading to their kills. And regardless of the kit that they chose to bring into battle, they're going to be the ones that are doing more winning than losing. Now, part of me wonders if the preferred setup for ESF changing has kind of played a role in this. And if you remember a while ago, the best utility to run on an ESF was flares. It was preferred by almost everyone. But then one day, the developers buffed fire suppression, and all of a sudden we saw more and more people making the transition from flares to fire suppression. While it's true that fire suppression can help you not die from lock-ons because you can repair from the damage you took, it's also not doing anything to help you avoid them either. So with more and more players running fire suppression instead, are we seeing more deaths via lock-ons than we did before? I would think so, and if so, I think that has a lot to do with some of the hate that we're seeing based on these weapons. We naturally hate what is a problem for us. And if missiles are becoming more problematic, then we place blame on those. Now, I personally alternate between flares and fire suppression because I can never decide on what I think the better option actually is. Now, I can tell you this. Even with only 2 levels of flares unlocked on my primary NC character and only 1 level unlocked on my TR and VS characters, I rarely die to lock-ons. Also, they're rarely a contributing factor in my deaths. By the time someone is on me and locking me, I tend to locate them, pop my flares, close the gap, and then get to the dogfight. Then it's all just nose gun versus nose gun. Now, I'm not going to say that I always walk away from those engagements alive, but I certainly can say that lock-ons were not a factor in the majority of my deaths. In fact, I think what they have really started to become for me is more of an early warning system that someone's on my tail or trying to get me killed. Now, I think it's worth noting in this, I keep saying they. I don't want you guys to think I'm lumping myself in with the elite players because I don't consider myself an elite pilot. I'm a good pilot, but I'm not elite, so I'm not trying to take up arms for anybody here. So, now that we've looked a little bit into the situation at hand, let's get to the ethos of this video here. The hate that goes out to the players from other players is hilarious, and frankly, I think it's just totally a situation of misplaced blame. If you feel so strongly that Tomcats and Coyotes are cheap or easy mode, that blame needs to go to SOE. You know the saying, don't hate the player, hate the game? It's extremely relevant. Players have the right to use whatever means necessary, whatever weapons they want in the game. And for me, the bottom line is this. If it makes them happy, they should use it. If you don't like it, give SOE some suggestions or ideas on how to balance or fix the issue. Or an even better solution is, if these are the bane of your existence, try running a setup that prevents this, or at least hinders their ability to kill you with your arch nemesis. No player should really try to dictate how another player is going to play the game. And when everything they're using is actually in the game. It's not cheating, it's not even really that cheap, it's just kind of there. So everything in this game is a give or take, whether that be flares or fire suppression, missiles or afterburner tanks or whatever. There's a yin and a yang to just about everything. So I know this comes off as a little bit ranty, but I just don't understand all the hate. It's kind of frustrating to see, and I feel like I hate seeing that division right down the line of the community. And I guess, well, let's kind of scratch that a little bit. I guess I understand the hate, but directing it at players in my mind is just silly. Place the blame, if you're going to blame something, in the right location. So that's all for now. Stay tuned for a lot more. I'll catch you all later on, and take care.